Now it's been a busy week in Scottish politics. Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Morrell, the chief executive of the SNP, was arrested on Wednesday in connection with an investigation into the party's finances. He was then released without charge, pending further investigation. So what's next in Scottish politics? To discuss this and more is Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Tories. Douglas, morning.
Morning, Chris. How are you?
Oh, good. Thank you, Douglas. Now, thank you for joining us on the Easter Sunday morning. Now, before we get into the SNP and what's happening there, you're interviewed in today's Sunday Telegraph talking about, well, let's ask you the question, why are you asking Scots to vote Labour?
Well, I'm not, Chris, and it's very clear. I think you'll see the quote from me in that article that says I will always encourage Scottish Conservatives to vote Scottish Conservative. And what I'm trying to say is that there are many seats across Scotland where it's our party, the Scottish Conservatives, that are the main challengers to the SNP. So if people want to move on from the decade of division that we had under Nicola Sturgeon and has been continued under Humza Yousaf, then voting Scottish Conservative, and that means in some places Liberal Democrat and Labour voters backing the Scottish Conservative candidate, then we can see the SNP lose their grip on power here in Scotland. And I think for many people that's an option they're looking at, because come the next Holyrood election, the SNP will have been in charge for almost 2 decades, and no one can say Scotland's in a better place as a result of that.
That's not really what the party in London wants to say, though, is it? Because the party in London is saying in this quote, this is emphatically not the view of the Tory party. We want people to vote for Conservative candidates wherever they are standing, as that's the best way to keep Labour and the SNP out.
Well, the UK and the Scottish Party are absolutely agreed that we want to maximise the number of Scottish Conservative and Conservative MPs, MSPs elected. And in many parts of Scotland, the way to do that is by voting Scottish Conservatives, because by voting for the other parties, it only helps the SNP. So take my seat here in Murray, for example, Chris. We last won this seat before I was elected in 2017, the year I was born, in 1983. But we won it in 2017 and we retained the seat in 2019 because some Labour and Liberal Democrat voters supported me, supported the Scottish Conservatives as the best vehicle to remove the SNP from power here.
Do you worry about how the Tories are doing in Scotland? Because there's been weeks and weeks of concern about the SNP leadership as they debate who should be the leader. Polls show us here that the SNP is on 42%, the Tories far behind on 18%, Labour on 30%. We haven't seen any polling yet since the police issue happened midweek. Why aren't the Tories cutting through? In fact, it does appear that Labour's benefiting more than the Tories from the SNP chaos.
We saw a poll a couple of weeks ago that I think had Labour in Scotland down 4, the SNP down 2, and the Scottish Conservatives up 6. So there's been a range of polls recently. But the fact is, at the moment, the Scottish Conservatives have more MSPs and Scottish MPs than Labour and the Liberal Democrats combined. So people know that we are the biggest challengers to the SNP in many parts of Scotland, and that's why more and more people are looking to the Scottish Conservatives as the party that can remove the SNP from their area, be that in the north, the northeast, the south, in parts of the central belt such as East Renfrewshire. There are real opportunities for people to remove the SNP from power in these areas if they get behind the Scottish Conservatives.
There have been rumours, of course, reported rumours that Police Scotland delayed the arrest of Peter Morrell until after the election of the new Scottish First Minister, Humza Yousaf. Are you concerned about that?
Well, I think where I'm more interested in timing was Nicola Sturgeon's decision to stand down. For her to somehow suggest and continue to suggest it had nothing to do with this ongoing inquiry, I think is frankly absurd. We had an incredible scene this week, Chris, where someone who had been First Minister just 8 days earlier was in a house when the police came to arrest their husband. Now, obviously, that's an ongoing live police inquiry, and I can't go much further into it, but we have seen those scenes of the house being taped off, a police tent outside, and as you mentioned with John Sargent there, an incredible story by Georgina Edkins in the Sunday Mail today of a camper van being removed from Nicola Sturgeon's mother-in-law's house. So it continues to be an incredible story, and one that's deeply damaging, not just for the SNP but for Scotland, to see this played out in this way.
Yeah. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon has denied, of course, any prior knowledge of the arrest of her husband, but should there be some form of investigation by somebody to work out whether this happened and whether there was some form of moving around the political timetable to suit what happened last week?
Well, I think the most important thing is we get to the bottom of this inquiry. It has now been going on for, I think, 18 months, almost 2 years. It's been an extensive inquiry, and we saw that Peter Morrell was interviewed for almost the maximum 12 hours, released without charge, but pending further investigation, and a significant amount of evidence taken away from both their home and SNP headquarters. So I think people want answers, and those answers have to come from Nicola Sturgeon, from Humza Yousaf, and those at the top of the SNP, because there are further reports over the weekend and indeed today that Nicola Sturgeon angrily shut down any discussion about the funds being missing at an NEC meeting of the SNP. So this has been going on for some time, and I'm sure there are more witnesses that will be spoken to about it.
There are calls this morning, Angus McNeil being one, for the SNP leadership election to be rerun. We've heard rumours that supporters of Kate Forbes are similar in that camp. Do you agree?
Well, I think the SNP always want to rerun any election that comes out with a 52-48 result. That seems to be their regular comment on results such as that. I think the fact is, not just supporters of Kate Forbes, but we had, again, there are so many news stories here in Scotland at the moment, Chris. The current interim chief executive officer of the SNP and the party president, Mike Russell, making some quotes in the Herald yesterday that sounded like he was not particularly happy with Humza Yousaf as the new SNP leader and First Minister, but that's who the SNP voted for. And what I want to see now is the Scottish Government focused on delivering for the people of Scotland and prioritising the priorities of people of Scotland, which is not another independence referendum.
There's not an election in Scotland for some years yet, Douglas Ross, but where do you stand on tax? The Institute for Fiscal Studies says that someone on £50,000 a year pays £1,500 more in tax, someone on £150,000 a year pays nearly £4,000 more in tax because of the way that the Scottish Government can change the 1p due to extra tax on the higher rates of income tax. Would you cut tax if you became First Minister?
Well, I said that in 2021 in the election to the current Scottish Parliament, that the Scottish Conservatives over the course of this Parliament would seek to get our tax take in terms of Scotland similar and the same as the rest of the United Kingdom, because I think it's wrong that people are paying more in taxation here in Scotland to do the exact same job than elsewhere in the United Kingdom. That does cause us problems in terms of recruiting skilled people to do their jobs north of the border.
Next year is the 25th anniversary of the Holyrood Parliament. How many marks out of 10 would you give devolution?
Well, I think devolution has been a good thing in terms of bringing powers closer to the people of Scotland. But actually, the drive for devolution, because London seems too remote from many communities in Scotland, can now be put on the Holyrood Parliament and particularly this SNP Scottish Government. Because I was up in Shetland this week. It's part of the region I represent in the Scottish Parliament. And for many remote and rural areas, Holyrood now seems as distant as Westminster ever was. So I want to see a Scottish Parliament that actually delivers for people and represents the whole of Scotland, and at the moment that's not happening with this centralising SNP government. It didn't happen under Nicola Sturgeon, and because we've got the continuity candidate in Humza Yousaf, it's not happening under him either.
And how many marks would you give Rishi Sunak at the moment?
I think he's doing a great job, and I think we've seen progressively the Conservatives building more and more support because the public can see a Prime Minister who is quietly getting things done. Many things that commentators, other politicians felt would not be achievable have been delivered by the Prime Minister because he's determined, he works with people across the political spectrum to get results, and we've seen that in a number of different areas, and I am very delighted that the Prime Minister is doing a great job across the whole of the United Kingdom.
And marks out of 10, Douglas?
Oh, well, gosh, I never like that because people will give me marks out of 10, Chris, and that'll be the next question that I don't want to hear the answers to.
Okay, and just finally, of course, it's going pretty well for you. For a good quarter, you argue. Rishi Sunak is performing well in the polls. That might explain Labour's attacks UK-wide now on the Twitter about the Tory record on crime. It may not go so well after the May local elections in England, and that may lead to Boris Johnson coming back. What's your advice to party members who might be considering that?
Well, I know party members are working flat out across England where there are local council elections, and I want to see good results for the party in those local government elections. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you speak about the change in Labour attitudes. I mean, the advert that was put out by Labour that has seemingly been endorsed by Keir Starmer is in very poor taste, and one that they would be very quick to criticise the Conservatives for issuing. And I think the silence from some people at the top of Labour is very telling on that.
Well, Douglas Ross, thank you.